Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Ryan Gabsky, and I'm the Development Associate of the Buckley Institute, as well as the former student president of the Buckley program. I'm delighted to welcome all of you for our reunion weekend event. And before I introduce our guests for today, I want to say a few words about the Buckley Institute. The Buckley Institute is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity and freedom of speech at Yale. We host lectures, seminars, firing line debates, and an annual conference every year since 2011. Our over 780 Buckley Fellows have a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious conservative thought, the Buckley Institute has become an institution on Yale's campus and a symbol for a more open and more representative political atmosphere. Especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge, Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about us on our website, buckleyinstitute.com. So this morning, we're thrilled to be hosting a discussion on campus intolerance, spanning from attacks on free speech to antisemitism and beyond. We've assembled an excellent panel to explore these important and timely issues for you today. So now for our panelists. Evan D. Morris, PhD, is a professor of radiology and biomedical imaging and biomedical engineering. He specializes in kinetic modeling of PET brain images for studying diseases like drug addiction and Parkinson's, and for drug development. Before coming to Yale in 2009, he was on the faculty of Indiana and Purdue universities. In 2013, he was chosen Graduate Mentor of the Year. In academic year 2015-2016, he was a Fulbright Scholar to Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. In 2021, in response to anti-Semitism, he formed the Yale Forum for Jewish Faculty and Friends, YF, JF, and F. In 2022, he was awarded a grant from AEN to build YF, JF, and F, and educate the Yale community about anti-Semitism. Earlier this year, he led 25 Yale academics on a mission to Israel to learn about the effects of the war on Israeli colleagues and to oppose boycotts of Israel. He has recently written on these matters in the popular press, including Becoming a Jewish Activist, Say Our Name, Boycotts Betray the Ethos of Science, and What We Learned on Our Academic Visit to Israel. That was authored with Professor Ed Kaplan. Then Carlos Eire, PhD, is a historian of late medieval and early modern Europe with a focus on religious history. At Yale, he has served as chair of the Religious Studies Department and the Renaissance Studies program and has just been awarded Yale College's 2024 Burns Sewell Teaching Prize. Before joining the Yale faculty in 1996, he taught at St. John's University in Minnesota and the University of Virginia, and was a member of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton for 2 years. He is the author of several books, including his most recent, They Flew, A History of the Impossible. In 2003, he won the National Book Award in Nonfiction for his first memoir, Waiting for Snow in Havana, which has been translated into more than a dozen languages. All of his books are banned in his native Cuba, where he has been proclaimed an enemy of the state, a distinction he regards as the highest of all honors. Please join me in welcoming Professor Morris and Professor Eire. So the way our format will work today is I'll ask some questions to get the conversation started, but we're going to have plenty of time for audience questions, so please be thinking about what questions you'd like to ask the panel. And once we get there to the audience questions, Isabel will come by with microphone, so please wait until the microphone reaches you and speak into the microphone for the duration of your question. And so to kick us off, I'd like to ask you both, professors, both of you have been at Yale for quite some time now, so I'd really like to know how campus intolerance has evolved during your tenure.
Well, I've been here since 1996, but I was also a graduate student here between 1973 and 1979. So, coming back with an older body is not the right kind of reincarnation. But many things had changed between the 70s and the late 90s. And then between the late 90s and now, the change that I have seen is enormous in terms of the fear that I know students have expressed to me about speaking openly. I didn't begin to hear these complaints until 2010s or so. And since then, it has increased. So among faculty, since '96, not much has changed. The faculty is overwhelmingly liberal. They assume that all faculty share their opinions and will, speak very freely at all sorts of social gatherings as well as academic gatherings, assuming that you share their values and their viewpoints. And that's still pretty much the same. The one thing I noticed, of course, as a graduate student, I didn't hang out with faculty. But when I came back as faculty, I noticed that in social gatherings of any kind, conversations always, well, let's say 95% of the time, conversations were always started by saying, "Did you read that piece in the Times?" So that's the change I have seen.
Well, I have not been here quite so long. I came in 2009. But let me give an example from something that happened in class, and it's a contrast to what never would have happened in the earlier time that I was here, or even at Purdue or IU, where I taught before. So Ryan, this is a little bit of a class, so you see how much of being in a classroom you can handle early in the morning on Saturday over breakfast. So Ryan already told you what I do, which is I teach, in part, a type of math called tracer kinetics. There won't be a quiz at the end, but you do have to understand that this mathematics describes what happens when you inject something into the body and want to follow where it goes. And that might be important for understanding brain disease or drug development or anything that we said in my introduction. So, given that, what I just told you, you have to channel your best inner movie critic and go back and think of the ultimate movie from the 1960s. I would call it a B sci-fi movie. How many people already know what I'm thinking of? Okay, Fantastic Voyage, right? Because they injected a ship with scientists and then followed it until it got to, I think it was the vice president's carotid artery or something. So I have taught this course in one form or another and used a poster about Fantastic Voyage as the intro to this topic, because I'm teaching non-mathematicians as well as engineers, and I'm trying to give a feel for what it means. Now, you cannot mention Fantastic Voyage without talking about whom? Raquel Welch, of course. I think you can already see where this is going. So, year after year, I talk about Fantastic Voyage and Raquel Welch, and nothing happens, but the students enjoy, and I say, let's all put on our tight bodysuits and get injected into the bloodstream, and where are we going to end up? And it just makes the math real for them. Okay? Now, I happen to come across a Life magazine cover. Maybe some of you remember from 1972, Raquel Welch, don't worry, she had clothes on. And I used that as an additional slide. And of course, to try to explain to 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds even who Raquel Welch is, you have to use a certain hyphenated term. Exactly, sex symbol. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm going to tell you the word that was used in the 1970s to describe Raquel Welch was sex symbol, right? All of this is just historically and mathematically correct, right? Still, never a problem until 2021. In 2021, I did exactly what I had done for years and years, and I explained who Raquel Welch and that she was a sex symbol. And a few weeks later, one of my female colleagues and co-teachers took me aside and said, "Evan, we have a problem." And I said, "What kind of problem do we have?" And she said, "Well, the chair of a department was told by 4 students, who, by the way, dropped the class, so how interested were they in the first place, that there's some sort of problem." I never found out exactly what the problem was, but of course it was this, that I had brought up Raquel Welch in a perfectly mathematically appropriate way, and yet somebody had to run to their chair and complain, because they were more interested in finding offense than in appreciating my sense of humor, okay, which might be a little quirky, and my way of teaching, which I would like to think is engaging. So, there's a story to that, and that's my way of describing how things have changed. None of this did happen or would have happened up until the last few years, when students, I believe, come in with a certain predisposition toward finding offense, which is a great shame, or finding some reason for being uncomfortable, even when what's being said is being said in the most generous terms.
Well, thank you both for that. I mean, I agree. It seems like students are less charitable than they used to be. But Professor Morris, I wanted to ask you as well, related to what I was reading off in your bio. A few months ago, you helped organize a 5-day trip to Israel for, was it 25 Yale faculty? In addition to this, you've been an outspoken advocate regarding anti-Semitism on campus and a staunch advocate of Israel at Yale. And so this is all very important work. And so I wanted to ask you how you understand the connection between Yale's fundamental mission, which is to preserve, produce, and transmit knowledge, and your trip to Israel, as well as your push to collaborate with Israeli academics, invite Israeli speakers to campus, and to work with young Israeli researchers.
Right. Thank you. Okay. I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
Well, go ahead. I've got a question for Professor Eire after this as well. So feel
Then
free.
we'll let him monopolize.
He can monopolize afterwards.
So I did, with a few very dedicated colleagues, organize a trip of 25 Yale, mostly professors, to Israel in March. We were inspired by an earlier visit, January 1st, by a group of Penn faculty who went for a shorter time. Their focus was, because many of them were psychologists, they were interested in understanding how trauma was being treated in Israel. And I felt that they had done something very important and that we had to do something. But our focus was different, and so Ryan has sort of opened the door to a topic that is very important to me, and it's the issue of boycotts. And let me say something about boycotts and try to explain why it's an abandonment of academic principles such as Yale espouses. Boycotts are anathema to academics, and particularly as a scientist, they're anathema to scientists who, in a sense, although it's not explicit like the Hippocratic Oath in medicine, we take an implicit oath to observe and guard objectivity. Without it, what is science? It's nothing but propaganda. It's nothing but opportunities to score points. We all have to be objective, even when we're reviewing the work of people that we might disagree with. And I can tell a story when the microphone comes back to me. But it seems to me that anyone at Yale who does not adopt that opposition to boycotts is betraying his or her implicit contract with his or her field. Certainly for me, if I were to, from the get-go, say, I'm not going to review this paper by an Israeli because I oppose blah, 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 then I have already outed myself as nothing but a partisan. Not only that, but particularly with Israel, where there are so many opinions from far left to far right, and Israelis love to mix it up in arguments, you can only learn something by continuing to talk to people, not by excluding them. And when we come back to this topic, because I'd like to talk about it more, we can talk about different types of boycotts and how insidious they are and the damage that they're doing to Israel and to the sort of the reputation, I would say, of science and academia.
Well, Professor Eire, what I wanted to ask you was, you're part of this 150 plus faculty initiative called Faculty for Yale, which insists on the primacy of teaching, of learning and research as distinct from advocacy and activism. I mean, this goes to a lot of what we're talking about today. So I'd love to hear more about the group and why you joined.
Yeah, well, it started out as a very small group, but it grew to over 100.
Yeah.
And Faculty for Yale is one of the highest caliber discussion forums that I have ever taken part in. And at first, it was all through email, mass emails, everyone talking through email. Then finally set up a website so that there could be a easier type of exchange. However, Yale University decided it could not have a Yale.edu address. We had to have some other kind of address. Some decision was made at some high level here that no, this Faculty for Yale does not really represent Yale. But all of the discussion has been about institutional neutrality and the institution itself and even departments remaining neutral and not making ideologically laden statements to the public about issues that do not concern our mission here at Yale, which is to educate. And you might have heard that Harvard actually issued a very similar statement to what we have been discussing. Of course, they had a fire under them that we did not. They started the discussion before we did because I think the climate there was a little hotter, of course. But we've been trying to find a way of defining what institutional neutrality is. And the discussion has been very, very enlightening. But to show you one example of the kinds of things that disturb those of us who are faculty for Yale. And by the way, as soon as we were established, a counter group was formed describing faculty for Yale as ultra right-wing, perhaps even neo-Nazi. Here's what happened in one humanities department when the pro-Hamas demonstrations took place and students were arrested. The graduate students in this one humanities department, one or two or three of them who co-wrote the piece, co-wrote a statement that was supposed to go on the department website condemning Yale's abuse of the protesters in all the terms that you can imagine would be used. All the students, all the graduate students, PhD students in that humanities department received pressure to sign the document. And one who refused, who actually is from China and knows what a totalitarian state is like, was pursued constantly by a student who insisted that unanimity was essential. that's the kind of ideologically laden project that is found not just in that one humanities department, and that's what Faculty for Yale trying to get. Before now, we have a new president, so everything is going to take longer. But that's what we hope we can convince the administration to take a stand on neutrality on issues other than our educational mission.
Wow, well, the story you shared about the graduate student leads me to my final question, and then we'll turn it over to the audience, so please be thinking about what you might want to ask Professor Eire, Professor Morris. So what I want to ask the both of you is to what extent then do you think campus intolerance is really a failure of the faculty and university leadership to uphold reasonable standards of civil discourse? And do you think that what we're seeing on campus sort of follows from declining belief in American values and our founding principles? And I guess I turn back to you, Professor Eire, first, then Professor Morris.
Well, I think the second part of your question is more germane to what is going on, which is that there has been a cultural shift, a massive cultural shift that has created enormous divisiveness in American culture. Institutions of higher learning, because the faculty tend to be overwhelmingly not liberal, but perhaps would even describe themselves as progressive. It has been that way for generations now. 3, 4, maybe 5 generations since the end of the Second World War, even before. Universities and institutions of higher learning in general leaned left. So of course this climate was created where certain truths are unassailable. You cannot challenge those truths. If you do, it means one of two things, or perhaps both of them. The person who does not agree is either not very smart or evil, or both. So therefore this gets passed on and passed on and passed on. And yes, there is an obsession, an absolute obsession. And I can only speak about the humanities and the social sciences, but there is an absolute obsession now in higher learning with issues of identity, as well as issues of inequity and exploitation. To the extent that in my own discipline, and I'll give this as an example of, I wouldn't call it a failure on the part of the faculty because they haven't failed. They've been pushing a certain agenda for a very long time. But in my own area, which was early modern European history, or even more specifically, Reformation and Renaissance. Well, those two terms are not used anymore. Renaissance is too elite a term. It only applied to elites. And it speaks of Whiggishness. So our Renaissance Studies program is now called the Early Modern Studies program. Reformation has vanished. I have 8 students, 8 Yale PhDs, 8, who have yet to find a job because all early modern job openings are worded in such a way, I mean, they're crafted, they're very carefully crafted. If you do early modern history now, you have to do race, class, gender, or colonization and slavery. The Newberry Library in Chicago, wonderful library, actually has a program now, ongoing lecture series, Race Before Race, for early modern studies, Race Before Race. And, well, those students who haven't found jobs are probably not going to find jobs because that's the way in which job openings keep being crafted. And it's not just in history, it's in every humanities and social science discipline. And if you want to do religion, even worse. So it's not failure, but it's just the way in which the faculty mindset or worldview has been shaped over several generations.
So I do want to get back to anti-Semitism, but I'm going to pivot from something that Professor Eire just said, because I can speak to science. And again, I believe that science must remain objective to be valuable. But what's happening in science? Last night, so who's the greatest, the largest probably in the whole world, funder of biomedical research? It's NIH. And last night, while I was writing a few notes, I received an email from an institute of NIH that funds some of my work, so that's how I'm on the list. And it says, this request for information, so they're looking for comments, invites input on identifying and addressing, wait for it, gaps in, 1, the impact of structural racism on brain, cognitive, learning, memory, blah, 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 and the role of structural and systemic racism on the conduct of brain and behavioral health research. Now, they didn't say, I wouldn't have had a problem if they said, we want comments on how to craft research projects to determine if there is structural racism. But they've already decided, I think probably based on one flimsy paper, which is very convenient, that there is structural racism in science and health disparities, blah, blah, blah. And they're looking for people who will do research, what? Just to confirm their biases. This is very dangerous. I can't speak to what would happen to the world if all of history were polluted. It sounds very bad, but I can speak with authority on how terrible it will be if this trend continues and science is used for political purposes. And I can also tell you that it's not just this request for comments. There are now required, they're effectively DEI statements that go along with some grants, such as the ones studying the brain, which would apply to my work, which require that you tell them how diversity, which I guess is the elephant in the room, improves your science. But what if I don't believe that? And not only do you have to tell them this, that wouldn't be so terrible because everybody can just, say something and move on. But in the terms of NIH, it is now a scorable aspect of your grant proposal. So you get scored on how well you do on what amounts to a pro-diversity statement. And I'd just like to drill down on this a bit more if I could. Why do I say that? First of all, it doesn't make any sense to me. When I assemble a team, I assemble that team because of the talents they bring to the table and for no other reason. But what is heterogeneity versus homogeneity in the sense of a working relationship? All of you, whatever your business is, you know that sometimes efficiency is the most important thing because you're rushing to a deadline, let's say, and sometimes being slower and more inclusive, to use another loaded term, is more important. Sometimes, I'll give you an example. I competed for some internal angel funding to try to advance something that I wanted to turn into a business. And there are such funds at the university. And so I was trying to learn what had previous winners done. And I didn't even get to their titles when I looked at the names of all the winners, right? And in the first line, there were all the Chinese names. And in the second group of awardees, there were all some other ethnic group names and then some other ethnic group names. Is that bad? No, of course not. In that particular moment, the people that were configuring, I can assume, the proposal, they wanted to work with people with whom they communicated quickly and efficiently. Sometimes that's the overriding concern, is talking to people who understand you when you speak in abbreviations, right? That's the most important thing. So to make a blanket demand that I should have to even have diversity, however defined, is already a rejection of merit in favor of politics. And this is going to be the death of American science. You heard it here first.
Well, that is a grim note to shift to audience
Yes.
questions.
Sorry.
Sorry.
But, we won't hold it against you. So Isabel will come to you if those of you in the audience who have questions. Maybe you could, Isabel, you can call and choose people. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Neil Herbsman, class of '85, and also president of the Yale Jewish Alumni Association. I had a two-part question. One is, going off what you just spoke about with diversity, does Yale have, either at the medical school or in the humanities, a formal process whereby in order to gain tenure or have promotion, you have to have DEI statements? And also, if you could comment on what you think the intersection is of DEI and the rise of anti-Semitism and how that might affect Jews and faculty.
Well, the first part of the question, I can't really speak about the anti-Semitism part of the question, but I'm not aware of DEI statements being necessary for promotion. I just reviewed someone for promotion. The tenure I was chair of the review committee, no DEI involved. However, for over a decade, our applicants to the graduate school, PhD applicants, were required to write a DEI statement, even before the term DEI or acronym existed. Yes, and they were painful statements to read. Very, very painful. The two most painful categories were those who apologized for the color of their skin, basically, or their privilege in one way or another. Oh, I'm so sorry. And the others were the students who were just grasping at straws, trying to find some handhold or grip on an identity that would increase DEI goals at Yale. But we no longer require, the graduate school stopped it, no longer require the DEI statement of applicants.
But can I just pick up
Sure.
on that? So I also am not aware of DEI statements required in promotion. However, I have been, like I'm sure Professor Eire, on search committees. And I was on a search committee, of course I won't tell you who or what, about a year ago, and I made it clear, I said to the committee, do we require, is the university or some outside entity that's organizing this search going to require a DEI statement? And people assured me no, because I said, because I'm against DEI statements. However, it still snuck into the questioning. It was still one of the questions that was asked of all of the applicants in a very formal, consistent way. How would you promote diversity? Now, you have to, so that's the,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It gets in.
That gets in.
It gets in. None of this should be interpreted to mean that I'm not in favor of anybody and everyone having access to the job and joining the community. But merit has to be the bottom line. Otherwise, you're on a slippery slope and you're compromising everything. Now, I should get back to the anti-Semitism part, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm on my own, like all of us, my own personal Iliad, odyssey, political odyssey, and I was not a strong opponent necessarily of DEI, or at least the inclusivity part of it. The other stuff I think is just sort of, it's superficial. I certainly want an environment that welcomes lots of opinions, right? That's the way I would interpret it. But at this point, after October 7th, after the completely feckless, weak, inadequate, pitiful response of almost all universities, including this one, to celebrations of murder and rape and beheading, I would say that the whole concept is a farce. The whole concept of inclusivity and belonging is, I mean, it's ridiculous. What else? Talk to any 1,000 people on the street and ask them what belonging could possibly mean, and it has to mean that people should feel comfortable. Well, that's obviously not true. Talk to any Jewish student and plenty of Jewish faculty on campus. And I'll say one more harsh thing about DEI, which is I have now come to believe that although there are a few very good-hearted and open-minded people who are in the ranks of DEI at one level or another and are open to learning, most people come into it with a particular agenda, and they're going to push that agenda regardless of anything else. And that has proven to be terrible for Jews at Yale. So I think there's a direct connection. I mean, I'll say one more thing, and I'm a little bit hesitant to say this in front of a historian, but you know, I will say very quickly, how did we get to the place that we've been? I'm going to tie it to DEI and anti-Semitism. Well, some of you who remember Fantastic Voyage also probably remember what vote was taken in the UN in 1973. It was the vote to equate Zionism with racism. And so this is not a new thing, but the other side, however defined, has done a hell of a good job redefining words and turning them into derogations, turning them into insults. I mean, if I had to walk around Yale and had a choice between hanging a sign on my chest that said pedophile or Zionist, which one do you think would be safer? So I think that historically we've allowed words to be corrupted, yes, and concepts to be corrupted, and not enough people have pushed back. And so it's not really surprising that a 20-year-old comes to college and finds out that I'm a Zionist. Whoa, that sounds terrible. How come he isn't burned at the stake yet?
And this is what George Orwell captured so brilliantly in 1984. Main character works for the Ministry of Truth, and what's his job? Rewriting daily history, right? So he who controls the past controls the present. He who controls the present controls the future. And history can be misused most intensely by redefining the meanings of terms. Absolutely.
Whew, that was close.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Despite being from the class of '67, which makes me an old geezer, I have been a lifelong liberal, so it is fascinating and disorienting at the same time to be here and having given money to the Institute, and now, based on today's panel, I will continue to do that. I wanted to mention, because I think you're absolutely right about the DEI being a farce, and I think one of the counters to bias, hopefully, is education. So in that regard, I want to mention a book that is absolutely profoundly informative and profoundly disturbing. It's called Woke Antisemitism, How a Progressive Ideology Harms Jews. The only critique I have of the book is the progressive in the title wasn't put in quotes. Because when it comes to Jews, quote, progressives are regressive in their return to anti-Semitism. So the book is absolutely fabulous, and anyone who is interested in that topic, when we had a discussion of it at our synagogue book group, and I should say I'm an atheist, twice past president, we had to stop the discussion after almost 2 hours, which is highly unusual. So it's a book for those who are interested in the falseness of DEI. It's a book worth reading. Woke Anti-Semitism, How a Progressive Ideology Harms Jews. It's quite something.
Hi. Could you please share any progress or successes your efforts, like the outreach to Israel or faculty for Yale have had in swaying opinion or policies on campus?
On campus, it's too early for the Yale, faculty for Yale. There is, at a higher level, there is pushback. A little glimmer of hope on the horizon. There is pushback at several institutions. For instance, the University of Florida has received an enormous amount of funding to establish the Hamilton Institute, which is basically another version of our directed studies program here, a great books program to expose students at the University of Florida to the great Western canon. University of North Carolina, I just learned last week, is starting something very similar. And then a new academic society has been established. It was established last year, and I'm on the board of directors. It's the American Academy of Arts and Letters, which commits itself to free inquiry, free academic inquiry. It's not a conservative or right-wing version of other academic. No. This is the main focus is free inquiry, free investigation, free speech. And how does that bring about any change? Well, we're giving people prizes to help them with their work, and then also prizes at the highest prize once a year to one person for defending free speech. And last year, the prize went to Salman Rushdie.
So a few quick, maybe glimmers. One is that the organization that I started here, Yale Forum for Jewish Faculty and Friends, YFJF&F. I only mention it one more time to illustrate that I might be a good engineer, but I'm terrible at branding. So that was obviously a failure. But the good news about that group is that there are more than 170 people on the mailing list, many of whom are very active, beyond the 25 that went to Israel. And I think, without being too arrogant, I could say that there wasn't such a network that existed here before. And they're not all Jews, although most of us are. And so even though I have stepped out, or I should say handed the baton to the next generation of leaders for that group, I continually get emails, thank you for starting this, we'd like to start this group for staff, or thank you for doing this, we want to connect, we're the alumni group of such and such, we want to connect with you. So part of it is, you respond to crises, and maybe something good comes out of it. I just want to give you the follow-up to the Raquel Welch event because there's a positive note. So after I got this word that I had done something wrong but nobody would define it, I knew what we were talking about, and I basically for the whole semester continued to teach the class and also ground down my teeth from frustration. And finally, I decided, like I do a lot of times, I said, okay, I'm going to have to write this down and publish it somewhere. I didn't say anything to the class because I didn't want to pollute the environment of the class and make them feel bad. But on the last day of class, I'd already written down the op-ed, which you can read in American Spectator, and I felt, you know what? I'm going to tell the students who remained in the class, who were the 35 who were interested in the topic, what had happened to me. And my two co-teachers said, don't bring it up, Evan. Don't go there. It's not going to be good. But I'll tell you what happened. And these are graduate students and postdocs. They're not undergrads. The audience was aghast. And a lot of them felt terrible for me and felt embarrassed. And many of them wrote to me personally, and they apologized for the behavior of these other students. So I think I would call that a glimmer of hope too. You know, I'm not, it's not every student. It's not every student who's woke or easily misled or unable to engage in critical thinking. Look, we have a perfect example here. We have, there's so many delightful students that I've encountered at the Buckley Center and other places. And graduate students, because they're chosen, at least in the sciences, for what knowledge they have usually and technical skills, they come in from all different perspectives and are not so easily not as malleable, not as easily persuaded without thinking through. So there's both good and bad.
I wonder if you could take a moment to discuss, in terms of how we got here from there, the concept of the long march through the institutions. It was developed in the late 1960s by German radical students as a way to infiltrate government, business, and academic institutions with basically neo-Marxist agendas. Is that something that you see taking place over your career at the institutions, including Yale, at which you have worked?
This is for
Yes.
a history professor.
Yes, definitely. And I'm not just the historian. I lived in a totalitarian state. I lived in a Marxist totalitarian state and fled without my parents at the age of 11. Been there, seen it, immediately recognized it back in the late 60s when I started college. Immediately recognized. Of course, the Vietnam War was the bugaboo back then. But yeah, definitely. And had I gone into Latin American studies or Latin American history, I wouldn't have received tenure anywhere because of what I would have to say about Marxism. As a matter of fact, I've had many articles rejected at the start of my career. But I was already tenured here and well known and was asked to write an article on Cuba. And I said, "Are you sure? I'm not a historian of Cuba." "Oh, yeah, we just want your opinion." So I wrote, I spent the entire summer, it's the only time I spent an entire summer writing a paper. And the title was From Cha-Cha-Cha to Che-Che-Che, Deconstructing the New Improved White Man's Burden, in which I argued that anyone who is not Cuban, who praises the Cuban Revolution, is a bigot. And I received a single-space, 3-page rejection letter. How wrong I was. So it's been there. It's still there.
Is that article available?
I can email it or pass it on. Can I pass it on to Buckley?
We could figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, it never got published. It didn't. Thank you.
So I'd just like to follow up quickly that I also live vicariously and learn vicariously through my friends who grew up in communist countries. And the one that I'd like to point out now, because she's a scientist, is Anna Krylov from USC. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with her work. She's a chemist, but she's really the leading light on warning the world of the dangers of politicizing science. And she came out with a paper about 2 years ago called The Peril of Politicizing Science, and she draws heavily on her childhood and the abuse of science, which of course in the Soviet Union everything was in the service of the Communist Party. And she's still a brilliant writer and speaker about this. And in my ethics class, which I teach for biomedical engineers, I have her come in as a guest speaker. So again, and students respond. So there's both good and bad, but certainly, I guess I would say, why aren't we listening more to the people who have this unique experience and can tell us what the dangers are? I'll just point out one more thing very, very quickly. Not communist, but theocratic. I have another wonderful colleague here, Roya Hakakian. I don't know if any of you have read her books. I recommend them to you. Her memoir was The Journey from the Land of No, and she was a teenager during the revolution in Iran. And she writes brilliantly about the dangers of a fundamentalist, an Islamic fundamentalist state, and why we should be learning from these things.
To what extent do you think this environment we're in is attributable to the bureaucratic bloat, where we keep getting additional DEI bureaucrats whose basically future employment depends upon finding oppression and systemic racism and that sort of thing? And to the extent we have those bureaucrats employed at places like Yale, do we think they still believe in the Woodward Report or the basic free speech principles that were established at this school back in my time when I was here?
Well, I have yet to see bureaucrats at any level interfere with faculty decisions. We still pretty much, run things without bureaucratic interference. So in hiring faculty, for instance, that doesn't play a role. But we do for years and years and years. Maybe since I got here in '96, if you're hiring someone who is not underrepresented minority for faculty, you have to write a statement detailing why there was no underrepresented minority candidate. But the decisions are still being made. I think when it comes to admissions, graduate and undergraduate, I'm not sure about medical school or any of the other professional schools. It does have some impact, but not a tremendous impact as far as I can tell, because the quality of students that I've been teaching steadily since '96 here has remained ultra high, ultra high.
Okay, maybe we have our first element of discord here. So I didn't want to cheat you out of a disagreement. I would say this, that first of all, I agree with your assessment of the bloat and the effect, the deleterious effect it has. And I would say this, I'm not disputing whether or not I'm told what to do if I'm on an admissions committee, but it is only certain people that control sort of the discretionary funding. And those people, as far as I can tell, are all in DEI offices. And I'll give you a little quick example. So in my ethics class for biomedical engineers, it's a required first-year course, we explore a lot of things. You're thinking, biomedical engineering, what does that have to do with ethics? Well, we experiment on humans, and we experiment on animals, and so you have to know about the Nuremberg Code and the Belmont Report and what animals are classified how and who governs risk that is acceptable to humans, all sorts of things. And I also felt it was important to address what are real issues in science. It is not the same for women as it is for men. There are greater challenges for women than there are for men. Or at least I think it's worth exploring and creating a forum where students can ask questions openly. And so I always have, since I've taught this course about 8 years now in my department, had one night, one class period, which I call the women's panel, and I bring in women professionals who are either academics or they're in industry, and they answer questions, and there's sort of a no-holds-barred environment. And sad to say, I've pulled in all the chits that I have from my colleagues at Yale. I ran out of favors, the favor bank, a few years ago, so I had no choice but to start bringing in people from outside. Well, that costs money. And when I brought in women who were deans and provosts and so forth from other places, that was fine. But this year, and I got money from the DEI dean in the engineering school. This year, my initial proposal was, I'm going to bring in men and do a slightly different flavored panel discussion, and I didn't get a response to my request. So then I submitted another one. I wised up, and a week, or a month later, I said, okay, I'm going to do this women's panel, and I'm going to bring in blah, blah, blah. Yep, got the money right away. So maybe this just got lost in the mail, but I stand by my statement that there is a skewing of what goes on by virtue of who controls the pots of money for little things.
And does this bureaucracy believe in the Woodward Report?
The Woodward Report. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. The Woodward Report basically is something that Yale trots out, okay, as a fig leaf whenever there's a disturbance of any kind. And, the thing that I like about the Woodward Report most is that it says very clearly that a heckler's veto is not free speech. But, and to go back to boycotts, which is my central issue, I would argue that boycotts are just a heckler's veto on steroids. Okay? But if you collected 99 or 100 people outside at Yale, and you could do your own study this weekend and ask them, is the heckler, first of all, do you know what a heckler's veto is? And second of all, is it protected free speech? You'd either get a, huh? Or you'd get a, yeah, it's coming out of my mouth, so it must be free speech. So sadly, I would like, and I'm broadcasting, you can come and visit me anytime, I'm looking right into the camera, to the new president, if you want to stand up and give a speech on day one and read the Woodward Report and explain what a heckler's veto is, good on you. I'm waiting.
We have time for one final question, but hopefully Professor Morris, Professor Eire, if you have more time, people can come up afterwards.
Sure.
Great, so the final question then.
Right here. Okay, thank you so much. So this is a follow-up question from the observation about the Long March through the institutions and this question about bureaucrats. I am seeing the same kind of pressure to align institutions and study it across the Ivies, and to get rid of history and get rid of Western history, get rid of the canon, distort science as you described. And so I'm hearing us kind of trying to identify what is the mechanism, right? So now we've gotten something really interesting, which is bureaucrats and DEI roles. I just want to note for the record, all this activity about evaluating people on the basis of race and gender and so on is illegal, especially illegal in an educational context. That's a kind of separate, well, it's a related question. But what is the mechanism? In other words, who is putting these people in these roles? Who's giving them the memo, which literally I'm seeing reproduced, across the Ivies? Who's funding it? Why is the university going along with it? Right? Is it HHS money? Is it government money? Is it private donors? What is the money flow that is explaining this bizarre distortion?
Well, I don't know much about the money flow, but I do know that here at Yale, it's the provost who controls the money. And I don't know past the provost, under the provost, who sets the flow in motion. But definitely, any time that a new administrative position is created, it's not created by the faculty, it's created by the administration itself. And all the various deans and associate provosts, they're the ones doing the search for administrators. Faculty don't get involved in searches for administrators at all. So it's up there and it feeds itself, it grows on its own.
Yeah, the money flow is a critical question. I'm not sure that I have a good answer either, except where, in the cases I mentioned about required DEI statements coming out of NIH, which I actually think gives license to scientists to impose their political biases on science, and it gives them license to use their science, just like in some cases, there are people on this campus who would say that the most important thing about medicine, and I'm not a medical doctor, is to achieve social justice, to fight back against racism, systemic racism. And I would say, no, the most important thing you can do is fix my broken ankle. So I would say something also even more sinister, but since I've already said a lot of provocative things that are going to could get me in trouble, what the hell, right? And this is, and I'm going to make it really extreme. During Nazi Germany, many people used the Nazi Party as a means of political advancement. They were academics who wanted the positions of Jews, and so they outed those Jews. And I'm not calling any of my colleagues Nazis, but there are absolutely climbers who use the whole DEI movement as a means of advancing themselves.
Well, this is unfortunately all the time we have, but I hope you'll join me in thanking Professor Morris, Professor Eire.